You are the Swiss Cybersecurity Advisory and Research Group Director. You are also professor at the Lausanne University in Digital Security, and you are advisor for governments, for different organizations who ask for expertise in the cyber field. And I checked just that during these last days. You appear in almost every ranking of the most influential personalities, in particular the most influential women in Switzerland and far beyond. Finally, we know that you have published a lot of different books. One just came out two months ago, probably, all for sure about digital transition, cybersecurity. Stéphane Duguin, welcome. You are the CEO of the CyperPeace Institute. You are leading the CyperPeace Institute since the start, 2019. And you trace and track the cyber attacks, especially in the health sector. You were very active in the beginning of your job at the CyperPeace Institute. And you worked also for the French police in the sector of cybersecurity, in the Ministerium of Interior of France. And you were also engaged in different programs and missions for Europol. Thank you for being here. Finally, Christophe, Nicolas, welcome. You're the Chief Information Officer of the Kudelski Group, who is developing very fast its activities on the cybersecurity side. You are engaged and based in Canton de Vaud, but also in the United States. Which state is that? Arizona, United States. And you are working for Kudelski for more than 10 years now, and where this sector, is that correct? Yeah, more than 10 years now, I'm sorry. And let's say that when it burns somewhere in the cyber space in Switzerland or elsewhere, you are the one and some others that are called first. So let's start directly this panel about the responsibility for protection in the cyberspace. Who has to do the job? Is it the states at the different levels? Is it the businesses, the companies who have to take care about their own data? Is it individuals, you, me, us, as citizens? And what can we do to really make this cyberspace safer? Today it looks really, from the exterior, as I'm not a specialist, but going into that subject, it looks really like a jungle. And it seems that there is no clear laws, no clear understanding, that as often in these cases, the criminals are a little bit ahead in their ways and methods and knowledge than those who are trying to defend the safety of the place. So perhaps let me start with you, Solange, on this global question of what are the major threats of cyber attacks for the civilian society. For 4 or 5 years, almost nobody cared actually about criminality in the general public, about cyber criminality. Today, it's almost panic. We have a feeling of almost a panic in certain sectors. How would you define the real state of the cyber net, of the cyber threat today? Is there a kind of hype? Everything is exploding. What does the reality look like? Is it such bad? Yes, and please, it's on, but you have to talk very close to the mic.
Okay, thank you, Pierre, for this kind of invitation. Thank you, and everybody. Just to answer the question, perhaps you can see by yourselves that the number of targets is exponential on the internet and with the cyberspace. More we are connected, more we will be attacked. And we have to admit that we haven't any sufficient cybersecurity prevention measure. And for me, it was 10 years ago at the World Economic Forum in 2012 when the WEF declared that we have to be cyber resilient. So for me, it was a shock because we have to admit that we cannot prevent. If we are in a state of resilience, we have to admit that we cannot have stopped the cyber threat before they occurs. So this is why, since 10 years ago, we developed more crisis management and incident management solutions than prevention. So there is a problem with the Internet of Things, with all the systems we are connected. Look what have happened with the supply chain in IT and security management. They have been targeted by cyber attack. So the most biggest company over the world have also been the target of cyber attack. The data have been hacked everywhere on whatever the platform is looking for the data. So how can we think that we, a simple user, can protect our value? So the question is, I think most of the important questions for me is who is responsible for cybersecurity, who is in charge, and who is accountable. So we have to admit that we have not a sufficient answer to this threat. And we know already with cybercrime as a service, it's becoming more and more profitable for the malevolent people. But malevolent is not only criminal actors, but that can be everybody over the world.
We'll discuss this responsibility question, very key, in a few minutes. Christophe, Nicolas, so as I said, you are really at the forefront. Your company has for sure a prevention mission, but you are also the company that some people call when it's in a certain way already too late or almost too late. What is your experience in the last, let's say, 6 months? How many calls do you have of that type of urgency calls who arrive to Kudelski, and how do you respond to those?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me. So it's always difficult to have an exact number, and I think putting things into context is good. So we are serving through what we call a managed security service offering. So we are helping our customer clients to watch their back and watch their technical and IT asset. So out of 400 customers that we are covering 24/7, we see usually per day, and again, when you talk about event, we talk about even more than attack. So there is about 480 million events per day for those 400 customers. And that can be just noise, because when you look at someone's asset by scanning their perimeter, those are creating one event. So out of those 480 million per day, we usually look at about 600 suspicious events per day for those 400 customers. And out of that, usually we raise them as an incident. 40 of them will be raised as an incident and will communicate to the CISO or to the IT security people to look at that incident. So that's the day-to-day nominal, quote-unquote, work, if you want. Out of that, we have something like 180 cold call in terms of, hey, I got a problem, I'm maybe not your customer, but I need help. So 180 calls per year, usually, for something that was not in our radar before, and people need some help. So that's a bit, again, the idea. So something like once every 3 days, we'll get a call for something that is not planned, and for every customer, 40 incidents per day for 400 customers, just to give you an idea.
Stéphane Duguin, CyperPeace Institute. What is your take on this? And perhaps as you follow very, very closely the question of the health institutes, how has it evolved in these type of targets? Is it more and more that they are attacked, and are they particularly vulnerable, or what's the problem actually in on the health side?
No, thanks for the question and the co-organizing. Okay, I would like to link your question with your opening statements in terms of who is responsible at the end of the day? How come that we are in this situation still now? Because it's not new that there's cyber attacks. There's a immense efforts in investment, like financial investment every year for the past 15 years in cybersecurity. And in parallel, you see this exponential increase of attacks. So something is not working somewhere. And I will go back to the healthcare because the healthcare is a good example of why this is not working. I think the first problem, at least a thought that I would like to share with the audience, is we are not telling the right story. When we are documenting cyber attacks, we, society, media, everyone, we have the tendency to talk about cables, about computers, about attacks, about numbers. This is very raw, this is very like broad. At the end of the day, we don't tell the stories of the real victims. In the context of healthcare, these victims are the patients or the healthcare professional. Allow me to share one example. In Finland, a clinic called Vastamo was targeted, in fact, via one of their suppliers by a cyber attack. The attack was quite simple, is entering into the system, staying into the system, stealing all the data, and being in capacity with this data stolen to launch the second phase of the attack, which is crippling the system with the ransomware to force the victim to pay a ransom. So it's sad, but it's quite a known modus operandi in the criminal world. The specificity here is that this clinic is a clinic of psychological support for their patients. And what was stolen is the conversation in between the patient and the doctor. Meaning everything that you're saying to your psychologist, to your psychiatrist. All of this was taped and was stolen. So what happened is that the criminals, they outreach first to the company and they said, you know what, we have your data and you have to pay if you want to get back to your system. And they were saying, no, we don't pay. Okay, fine, you don't pay. Then they went to each and every person they had data on, they stole the data, all the patients, 25,000 patients. They went to them one by one, and they said, you know what, I know exactly what you think about your family, your mom, your secrets, your family history, and this is on the internet in 48 hours if you're not paying. For Finland, they had to put in place a specific task force to manage victim support, psychological impact of attack. There were attempts of suicide. It's one of the major psychological crises in this country, and they didn't have the backbone of the structure to go into victim support. That's a cyber attack. That's what we're talking about. Not network, not computer. We're talking about this human impact. Second example in healthcare, it's not so well known, is I point you towards a study of Vanderbilt, where it's demonstrated that if you go with a heart condition in a hospital, and this hospital has been ransomware like 3 months before, 6 months before, you go there, in a critical situation, you have just more chance to die than before the ransomware. So why? Because you're going to be taken care of with an additional time of 2 minutes and almost 3 minutes, in fact. And when you have a heart attack, 3 minutes is the difference between life and death. Why? Because after the attack, there's a change of process, there's a change of technology, there's a change of talent. It creates a lot of friction. I mean, there's a real human impact of the attack in the healthcare capabilities, and then their capacity to provide care gets impacted. So I would say, yes, healthcare is a good example because it's still impacted. We see in our platform, Cyber Incident Tracer Health, that's I advise the audience to consult its free resources online where we, CyperPeace Institute, document the state of play of attack on healthcare. We are still today at least 4 attacks per week. In the peak of the pandemic in COVID, it was 1 attack per day, and this is still happening. Why? Because not enough resources, investment in healthcare, not enough talents to create cybersecurity. And I will close with the opening statement, not enough accountability of, in my view, states to be sure that from the regulation point of view, the resource allocation point of view, there's something happening. We'll come to that.
Thank you. Christophe, Nicolas, if a company calls you or an individual and says, I'm the subject of a ransomware, what do you say? Do you say them to pay or not to pay?
That's a key question. So just from an industry perspective, we think that 58% of the people are paying still. That's the number we see. And on average, they are paying around $300,000. And again, it's always difficult to have numbers. People want numbers, but those are the ones, I think, circulating into the industry. So we're not talking about just $10,000 on the side and then you move away. So the first things, if you decide to pay, you are giving a signal that you are up for business. And then on the other side, they may see, okay, that's an interesting prospect that I want to keep on my customer list or prospect list, because it seems that they are willing to pay. Sometimes you have to pay because you have, as Stéphane mentioned, I think if you have a patient that can die, maybe sometimes it's better to pay or not to pay, but that decision should not be taken lightly and should not be taken alone if you don't have, because if you are a target of ransomware, probably you may not have all the assets and all the people to help you on that one. So think about who can help you in that case. Yeah, discuss, and before deciding about one or the other, get some advice.
Solange, Ghernaouti. One of the problems seems to be that many businesses feel are kind of ashamed that they were hacked, and that they are under cybercriminality pressure, and many of them don't declare that they were attacked. So explain why there is is it such a bad public marketing if you are attacked, and why is it so important that all these attacks are openly declared? And 1 second to just say hello to Mr. Florian Schütz, the federal delegate to the cybersecurity in Switzerland. Welcome. We started without you, but you will catch on. Thank you.
I'm sorry for the delay. There was fog in London, so we couldn't depart.
No problem. Solange.
It's very important that we have to declare all the cyber attacks that occurs, because if we don't have the real number of what is going on cyberspace, we cannot react and develop appropriate measures. So it will be very important that regulation impose that people or enterprise declare the fact that they have been under cyber attack. And perhaps if we begin to declare this as a usual fact, because it's usual now, there will be not so much shame on the enterprise, because everyone is vulnerable. And an enterprise that has been hacked, she is at least aware of the problem. So it's very important to declare the fact when it is appropriate in time, to have sufficient time to react, and then perhaps to declare.
Florian Schütz, welcome. You're the dedicated federal delegate for cybersecurity in Switzerland. This was a decision taken to create this section, was a decision taken by the government in 2019. That's also the year you started, that from the very beginning in your job. You lead the National Center for Cybersecurity. And if I understand correctly, I would say that you're a kind of guardian and cybersecurity angel for Switzerland. I don't know if you are ready to assume this position, but it's like that we could see it. Now, we were just talking about the huge numbers and the impact, the incredible impact that cyber attacks can have in different sectors like health, as we just talked about. What is Switzerland really doing? You are about 40 persons, I guess, in your section. I mean, this looks, I don't want to say ridiculous, but it looks tiny compared to the amount of the millions of attacks a month in Switzerland. What can you really do?
Yes, so you're absolutely right. So I'm coordinating all matters cyber across government and implementing the Swiss national strategy. And I'm also here to talk to the public and, answer questions. So what can the government do? It's not only the National Cybersecurity Center, right? We're around 45 people, but there are others. There's the military that deals with the military tasks, intelligence that deals with intelligence tasks, and the police that deals with cybercrime. All of that, but however, is a close collaboration with the National Cybersecurity Center. So, and I also think the question, how many people are there, is sort of the wrong question, because you can't solve it with people anyways. You need to automate it. It's about technology. You need to build proper technology. It's about governance. It's about legislation. And so that's also very important. The government is not here to protect you. I got to make that very clear. That's not the job of the government in a democracy.
Why? You just say that, but why?
We're in a democracy. You have liberties. You have responsibilities. It's even in Article 6 in the, I lack the English word, Bundesverfassung, that as a citizen you contribute to the government, right? So the government is not, even if we wanted, we couldn't. We don't know when you come home, we don't know what you do at home, how you configure your system, and we shouldn't. That's your private space. We don't know what you do in your company and what systems you use, and we shouldn't, because that's your company.
Yes, but
what government needs to do is create framing conditions that allow you to protect yourself. And that's where, to answer your question, I think we are already doing quite some things. You talked a little bit about reporting or not, so we're implementing a reporting duty for critical infrastructure. We support critical infrastructures with technical first aid if they have a problem. We have a reporting forum for citizens on the website. We have awareness campaigns and so on. Could we do more? Yes, of course.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You just jumped to the next question now. This is the key question: who is responsible for cybersecurity in a country? And when you say straight ahead, we are not responsible for your cyber life in a certain way, I could answer, yes, you are. When I walk down the street, I expect that the state puts everything in place to protect me. There is a police, there are traffic lights, etc., etc. I mean, it's not just a jungle. I have a second life in the cyber. Why shouldn't I be protected there? As my life there is very important too.
So I'm sorry to disappoint you. You're not fully protected when you walk down the street.
No, not fully. That's right. There is always accidents.
And the same is in cyber, right? So the government implements road rules, right? That should allow you to be safe on the road. If you go too fast, if you hit a tree, that's your problem, really. The government is there to create these framing conditions, but not to take you by the hand and walk you over the street. And that's very important. You don't want that. You would give up all your liberties for security. Who would want to do that? We live in a democracy, and that's basically what's important. So I think one big issue is that many people don't understand cyber enough. And, you know, they shouldn't. It's part of your everyday life. You use your phone. So the question is, how can we bring you to a point where you get a good enough feeling for risks? Because when you cross the street, when you ignore a red light, or there's no pedestrian crossing, you automatically assess the risk. And you take the decision to walk or not. That's why we accompany children. That's why we leave you doing it alone as an adult. And I think that's missing currently, because it's not that new, but it's still not very used to.
I come to you, Christophe. Just Stéphane Duguin, what's your take on this? You work for the French government in the cyber police, if I understand. Is it a different perspective looked from France? And what do you think about this responsibility of the state? Should there be a real responsible, for example, to protect the hospitals? Who is responsible if the state is not?
So, okay, I will not speak on behalf of the French government at all, but I can share what I think about this, and I would add maybe some nuances there. The way I join Florian very much is that there's something about personal responsibility. I mean, you all know about this say that is explaining that in cyberspace the problem is in between the chair and the keyboard. So it's a human mistake that are making the risk. I push back on this, to be honest with you, because it's easy to count the mistake, but it's not easy to count everything nice and smart that people are doing every day to prevent attacks. This is not counted. So it's very easy to count the mistake and not the rest. But okay, putting this aside for a second, this dimension is important. But still, I would argue that states have the responsibility indeed to set up rules, and it was mentioned, but only to make sure that these rules are enforced. Not only to set up the rules and hoping that the whole community is going just to follow them. So there's, in the physical space and the cyberspace, there's mechanism to enforce the rules, to monitor, to investigate cyber criminals, to prevent abuse of technologies, and this is the responsibility of states. And in fact, it's the responsibility of the states towards its community. At least in a lot of states, we are having our activities in when we are tracking cyber attacks. There's something else, I would say, if we go into state's responsibility, and I will go to your healthcare question, which is not to create additional problem. So, additional issues, additional risk. Let's take a simple example, the surveillance, the spyware. So today you have a market of spyware, which are pieces of software that are designed in order to infect your phone and transform this into a portable spy, taking control of the camera, the mic, everything. And this market exists because states are creating the demands. States, under the auspices of national security, needs to have surveillance tools. For that, they subcontract the development of spyware to private actors. And then you have a lot of demands, a lot of supplies, the prices goes down, and everyone is insecure. This, to me, is the responsibility of states, and states only, to curb it. So cyber, indeed, and I join Florian, this one is a complicated word, a lot of notions there, but when you go into the details, we see that in different levels, states are quite responsibility. When it comes to healthcare, critical infrastructure, in a lot of countries, yes, states has a direct responsibility to regulate on the reporting, to facilitate the reporting, but then to take measures when there's a reality of attacks on healthcare.
Thank you. Christophe, Nicolas, you wanted to react, and perhaps let's also try to answer this question. How are the cyber criminals organized? I mean, it's pretty sophisticated. There's a real market, I guess, on the darknet where you can buy your kit, or that's what I heard. So can you tell us a little bit about that also?
Yeah, maybe just 2 words on the who is responsible for that. I think it's a bit like for your health. 12 or 24 months from now, we will not have been in that panel sharing the same mic. You will all have face masks due to COVID. Now, we know that COVID is still there, but we quote-unquote accept the risk. So cyber starts with cyber hygiene, the same. So everyone needs to do the basics right. And then to Florian's point, then all the chain needs to have that part also of the risk mitigation. You have a health insurance, there is cyber insurance, so you may, as a company, you need to think about how do you want to do the mix between technology and cyber insurance, and then for sure there is still a lot to be done at the canton and at the federal state level in Switzerland, which complexifies sometimes the issue, but we are more than happy to have already now NCSC there and Florian there, because that was really a gap. Then to your second questions, with any new technology, and that's the same with the cyberspace, the bad guys usually are the first one to jump in. And guess what? You may have the Scripps kiddie that can do 14 millions, and there was a lapsus, I think, an Oxford student, teenager, that started to do ransomware and was able to, quote-unquote, raise and or make 14 million in a couple of months. But on the other side, you have also very well-organized organizations that do, like any business plans, and they try to identify who is the target, and they will look, as Solange mentioned, they will just use the crime as a service type of systems. They will use the best ransomware developer, they will use the best network to spread it, and then they will have someone that connect the money and then that clean up the money. So they are building up, and sometimes it's 100 people working on that. I think the Conti group have been exposed through the Ukrainian leak there. So out of that, if you read those internal communication, you can guess that there were about 100 people doing 180 million per year in terms of business there. And they clearly look at who is my prospect, which industry vertical I want to target. So, okay, healthcare in Switzerland seems to be good. They have enough money, so let's target that. So they definitely are very well organized if they want.
Before jumping to Solange, Florian Schütz, is Switzerland, as it is a very wealthy country, is it a special target for cybercriminality?
I wouldn't say so. I don't think our numbers match approximately with what is available on a global scale. So I don't think it's a special target, but that shouldn't mean we can't improve, because it's far too easy for criminals. I mean, and there we come back to what I initially said. IT systems today aren't built well. This is actually an engineering discipline, and you wouldn't walk over a bridge that is built as an IT system. You just wouldn't do it because it breaks all the time. And we need to get back to properly engineered systems. And then it will get harder for criminals. And then we could see effects that, because it works as if it's a deregulated market. They want to make most money for the least investment. And because it's so easy, so I can give an example. So we published up once that in 1 week we sent out 200 inscribed letters to companies telling them you have a problem, you have a well-known vulnerability in your systems, criminals are using that, you will have a problem if you don't fix it. If we sent the letter, that means we tried to call, we sent an email and there was no reaction. And we see it happening all the time. They get encrypted, they go into TV, they say we didn't know. I look at my NDA and I say, too bad I have an NDA, right? And that's a problem. If we don't change our mentality, we just make it too easy. And that also goes back to the markets and the tooling. Of course, there's a market around all of this. And if it's easy, it's also a cheap market. If it gets harder, the market prices will increase. The sophistication will also increase, so it's sort of a rat race. But in the end, that will do that. And maybe one very quick comment to the govware or however you want to name it. It's again about balance and context, right? So I do believe we need to secure as many systems as we can. At the same time, there is the need for a police to do an investigation if there is a big suspicion. And there need to be proper rules in place. And I think that market today is not enough regulated. I think that's a market where regulation helps. And I think that will be a topic that's also very important in the future.
Yeah, we will come back to that regulation. Solange, you have the overview of all this as you look at also globally. In your view, responsibility, who is key in the responsibility? We heard Florian Schütz is saying, if I understand that the individual has a lot of responsibility too, as the state also, but individual is first. So who is first?
I think state has a huge responsibility when state oblige or requires that the citizen use digital technology for e-administration or for everyday life. So if the state oblige to use this technology, they can assume that this technology are safe enough for the citizens. So we are not in this case. So I think before we need to accompany, to share the responsibility. We cannot put the responsibility only on the end users, because the end user can use only the tools that is at his disposal, and these tools are with a lot of vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities are exploited by the criminal actors or everyone actors. So there's a huge responsibility for the digital transition and for the way we use technology. If state oblige or required to use this technology, state is responsible. And the other part of the question, I think, that the providers are also a huge responsibility to provide the good tools to make the life safe in cyberspace in real life.
Florian Schütz, perhaps on this point, can you answer on the responsibility of the state that puts out the technology? That allows the technology.
So yeah, it doesn't put it out. That's companies.
Right.
So I think it's important what Solange said. It's a shared responsibility, right? There's not just one. We need to think more in networks, right, and in effects and side effects. What's very important is, as I said, the state needs to create framing condition. That means regulation where regulation is needed, but also put in motivation where motivation is needed. Quite often you can motivate things. You can motivate markets by giving benefits to those that do good security. Tax benefits, whatever. I'm not an expert on tax law, right? We can think about new models. How can we, for example, attract engineering talent that they want to work in Switzerland and build good software here, right? And by that, become a better export nation on IT and maybe build up soft power. But we also need to be very aware that because the digital is rather independent from geography, it can also be moved quickly. So if a company doesn't like it anywhere, they move their assets and their offices. And we've seen companies negotiating with governments just as governments between themselves would do. And I think that's a power shift that we still don't yet fully understand. And I think we need to better look at it. It's a globalized market, and I think governments have a hard time to grasp that because they come more from a territorial view.
Let's go to regulation then. What kind of regulation? But first, Christophe, Nicolas, private companies usually are not very fond of having more regulation. In this case, what is your take on that? Do you need more regulation for cyberspace, or you think it's okay and you can manage it?
I think we need clearer definition or specification. So just to take an example, when you are going through a public tender for a security solution for the state, and where the security aspect is even not in the list of criteria to judge it, and sometimes the cost there, you end up not having a true value for security, and then for sure it will be the less costly solutions that will win, and guess what, usually it's not the most secure one. So I think we have first to make sure that the awareness that security has a value, and even if short term you pay maybe a bit extra premium value, then in the long term it pays off. So I'm pretty sure if you build Grand Dixence today, you will have some SIA norms for architects about how to build properly, and you can judge the people on that. And that reflects a bit what Florian was saying. If you build now a security solution or IT solutions, you don't have really, and we do have standards, but they are not usually enforced, nor recognized, nor recommended, nor valued. So before going to regulation, let's make sure that we use the standard when they make sense.
Perhaps Christophe first, and then Solange on the same question. We need, okay, there is a need of regulation, but at what level? I mean, we know that, as you all mentioned, cyber attacks are started from a country to another country. So it's very international, and it's very hard to prosecute the authors of cyber crimes very often. So what kind of regulations do you think is the best to Stéphane? I'm sorry, Stéphane, to try to put a break to this evolution.
Okay, I guess the first thing would be to realize that there's a lot of regulations already today.
There is not a lot.
There is a lot.
A lot.
Regulations. There's a constellation of regulation. National level, international cooperation, framework, international law, international humanitarian law. I mean, there's tons of regulation out there that close or far impacts illegal activities in the cyberspace. On top of the regulation, you have norms that, by the way, have been agreed by all states in the world about norms of responsible behavior in the cyberspace. They are there. So the issue is not so much the lack of regulation. The issue is the non-enforcement of regulation. So there's two issues here. The first one is that how can you enforce what you do not measure, because there's no measurement at scale of the reality of cyber attacks with data that are public, that are peer-reviewed. So the work that we are doing in CyperPeace Institute to collect the data on attack on healthcare globally in order to help the assessment of how efficient a regulation is or not was not done before. The same for what is happening in Ukraine. And now we are starting another one when it comes to the specific threat profile of the humanitarian sector, which is heavily impacted by attacks, but there's no baseline anywhere. So first, we need to measure. And there's a collective efforts, and I join Florian and Christophe on this one, and what Solange opened with, is it's a network effort between civil society, between academia, between government, to make sure that we have this data. That's one. And then the second, then you make the link. You have an attack, you know about the attack, and you see if this piece of norms, this piece of law was useful in that context. And I'm sorry to repeat, but I think states have a specific responsibility because enforcement of the law is states' responsibility. And that's about investment in law enforcement, in judiciary, training, resources, capacity to investigate cases.
But you're telling today the law is not enforced.
What I'm telling today is that before thinking about a new law, let's enforce the one that is already there. Okay. If it fails, then we can start looking into it.
Okay, thank you. Solange, about that, we don't need new laws, we need them to be enforced first?
Yes, but perhaps we have to answer this question consider the business model of the digital economy, because all the development of the digital economy and the cyberspace is based on the exploitation of data. Data exploitation is not compatible with security of data, with privacy. So perhaps we have to consider how we have built this digital economy with the security in mind. Security is not designed with cyberspace. So we have to add cybersecurity issue. But perhaps a more important issue when we have to fight cybercrime or to look about major cyber attack, it's about the intergovernmental management level at the higher level of the world. So how we can negotiate and how we can make justice and police coordination and cooperation. And since for a couple of decennies we have Interpol, who is very useful in this domain, and perhaps we have to enforce the means of Interpol to pursue cybercrime. So Interpol is an instrument for why we don't use it more, why Interpol have not enough resources to go on the fight on cybercrime. But we cannot dissociate the problem of cybercrime, of cyber operation, and what is cyber attack at the international level. And if we consider the fact that some countries can be considered as digital paradise, how we can fight against digital paradise. And perhaps the idea is to design an international court for cyberspace, an international instrument to pursue cyber criminal. Instead, these criminals are hosted in countries that don't want to collaborate for international level. So international court for cybercrime could be to be considered also.
Florian Schütz, what do you think about that? And can you just tell us before, when you identify a cyber criminal, you know that he's operating, I don't know, from Germany, France, or whatever, or USA. What are your means to try to arrest these people? I know it's not your job exactly, but you know how a prosecutor in Switzerland can it go and try to catch the guys, or is he helpless?
It's my job to know, yes.
It's also your job, I'm sorry.
No, it's not my job to do it. That's my colleagues from the police, but it's my job to understand how it's done. So I might lack the correct legal terms in English, so I'm sorry if I don't use the proper terms. But what happens actually, so let's assume there was a criminal attacked a company in a canton. So this is a cantonal responsibility. So we usually encourage them, they might alert us if they're a critical infrastructure, or they just alert the NCSC. And the first thing the NCSC does is say, please inform the police. And we help anyways, right? Whether you do it or not, but we encourage them to go to the police. Then they go to the police, and the police will open a case. They will also support dealing with the incident. If it's a ransomware, they might start talking to the criminals and try to find out where they are, try to gain time. Once it is identified who the criminals are, it depends which country are they in. So usually, let's assume it's a criminal from the US or a group that operates solely from the US. There is a request through the federal police that actually US law enforcement deals with that criminal. Now, there's the first problem. Usually there are a lot of requests and it takes a lot of time. It could also be a transnational group. Then usually you work with the Europol or Interpol, depending on these mechanisms. And there were successful operations. Even in Switzerland, police arrested people. There was a case in the news, I think, beginning of this year, where a person in Canton Basel-Land was arrested. So I think, yes, law enforcement, it is difficult because we have these different laws, because it is transnational. It's not special for cyber. It's the similar things if we take money laundering and human trafficking and so on. But it's definitely something where we still have a way to go to improve that also in the international community. When it comes to regulations, I think we need to be very smart about regulation, because if regulation would work, then we could just forbid cybercrime. Done. That's not how this works, right? And we also need to understand that 75% of the Swiss companies earn less than $500,000 a year. So if we regulate them to, for example, everyone needs to have antivirus and a firewall and I don't know what, if we calculate down that $500,000 revenue, what they can spend on IT security, depending on the sector, that's 2,500 to 7,500 Swiss francs. And maybe Christophe can answer how much do you get for that. I can tell you it's not a lot. So we need to think smart about it, and it has been mentioned, internet service providers need to do their part, right? We have today a situation where some internet service providers take it very responsibly and some refuse to block criminal traffic. And they base their argument of freedom of speech. But doing a criminal attack is not freedom of speech, right? Known criminal, right? And I think in that areas we need to think where is regulation needed, where can we solve it with the positive stimulation. We tried, for example, in that area that we share information about criminal groups and actors with critical infrastructure and internet service providers, and we see some of them actually taking that information and using it, and we see others ignoring it, so we need to think about, does it need regulation?
Christophe, Nicolas, just one more word perhaps about the cyber criminal court or jurisdiction. Is this, Solange talked about, is this something that in your view can be useful?
So I must admit I'm not that deeply in that topic. So I just think generally saying we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. We have already transnational crime and we should deal with cybercrime in the same way.
Okay. Christophe, Nicolas, is it affordable to buy your services for a medium-sized business?
It is not, and that's the issue, and I agree with Florian. Usually I'm using that formula, so if you are doing 1 million revenue, you then max 10% for your IT spending, and 10% of that 10% will be on security, which bring you to 10K. So anything below that, when you have paid your antivirus and the very basic things, you don't have any money left there. So for SME, it's a real issue. And we have been engaged with the Canton Vaud with a program for Trust for SME to help them with a minimal involvement from their side. So they are paying, I think, 5K or 10K. We are providing them the full course of training to raise the awareness and then to kind of beef up their pitch to their board or to their investor to say, okay, now we need to act. But there is by no means they have the money for that today. But I think we need to be smart, and the same way we can get some subsidy for solar panel, and I know solar panel are very much needed those days. But if I, as a citizen, if I can get 5,000 subsidy for my solar panel, why as an SME I cannot get some money to fix the basic when it comes to cyber infrastructure?
Subsidies, one word.
Whether.
Florian?
Yes, just, I very much agree, but I'd like to add one thing. We see the most affected companies are those that go digital, right? And I talk to many CEOs, and I think when you design your digital business model, you got to build security in, right? You got to think about it when you do your revenue flows. Most companies do a digital business model, and then they think, oh, now I need security. So your business model doesn't work. And that's just also an economic reality. You have to build it in the future.
Stéphane?
Yeah, very much agree with this. And in fact, to share an example in the same line with the work that we are doing, not facing small and medium enterprises, but non-for-profit, so NGOs, mostly in the humanitarian sector, facing the same issue. So these are entities which are transnational by nature. They provide humanitarian services all around the planet in zones that are very in conflicts, and it's very difficult for them to attract the cybersecurity skills and talents to be secure. Their issue is that even when they understand their problem, they don't have anyone to help them to implement the solution. So, and we go back to what was mentioned several times, the question of resources. So how we organize the resource problem for the humanitarian sector is with our CyperPeace Builders program, where we provide for free support for cybersecurity for these NGOs. It's not only with advice. We just don't say, you have to do this, you have to do that, and goodbye, and we come back next year. It's advice, assessment of the situation, and free workforce that is going to help them to implement. And there, maybe a note of hope is to say that this is possible via, in this case, private sector coming together, providing for free volunteers that we are matching with these NGOs, so they get the knowledge and they get the practical support of cyber talents that are going to help them to be more secure. So we can be inventive in this field.
Seems to be a very good idea, but when I talked with Christophe Nicolas before that, he told me the problem today is first to have those talents, and there is a very sharp lack of talent. So if the private companies put their talents on these projects, what do they have for themselves? I don't know. Are you ready to do that? Perhaps first, Christophe Nicolas.
I think in Switzerland we have military duty. So if you tell me that I need to do my military duty helping NGO on cyber, or doing my military duty in a cyber organizations, I will be more than pleased to do that. So I think we can use already our strengths for tapping into that. And if every year my cyber engineer are going to 2 weeks in military duty or helping against NGO there, they will learn. It's a win-win. I think they will learn something, and the other side, they will benefit from something.
But is there anything like that has started, really?
It started, I think, in the army to have a cyber campus, a cyber defense campus, and I think there is ideas flying around for that, but I think it takes time, unfortunately.
You wanted to react, and then we go to Solange?
Yes, because you just reached my passion topic number one. This is talent. I honestly think we make a big mistake here in Switzerland. We have some of the most brilliant engineers, be it through universities, be it through apprenticeship. We have really good people.
You mean in your
no, in
organization or in general?
All across Switzerland. What we don't do is we don't promote them. Many of my colleagues tell me, Florian, I'm going to leave the country. I have no chance to have a career in management here in Switzerland. It's much easier abroad. That's one problem. If we don't find those talents that can manage, we will not get the good managers. And I've talked to many companies. They have CIOs that don't know about IT. How many of them have a CFO that doesn't know about finances? I ask. And I'm very serious about that. Because I've talked to recruiters that told me, no, but they're good managers. No, they're assistants, because they don't decide. It's very important. It's a cultural issue. We need to solve that. Second is, we need also to make sure that our talents can gain experience on a globalized market. So a lot of IT companies in Switzerland are very focused on Swiss markets. And if we look at other industries, they're very global, right? And I think we need to take that chance and embed proper IT into global companies, but also orient ourselves outside. Because if we look at an international technology company, the senior vice president will talk with the technology people at eyes height. They will understand what they say. Diversity is a very important issue in many tech companies because they understand without the diversity you will not get good digital products. And I think that's where we need to really think about not primarily only our education system, but also our corporate cultures, our company cultures. I see it's moving, but I do think we need to do faster.
Solange, you are an academic. Yes. Are you doing what you need to do in the universities?
Perhaps yes and no, because the problem is not only provide technician people able to develop system, manage or configure whatever, to administration of system, but it is the cultural problem of risk management that we haven't developed in every cursus from the beginning of school to the university level. We are we work in silo, only one discipline and not others. So manager doesn't know anything about cybersecurity issue, but that's a problem of education, and the responsibility is part of the government responsibility to put what we need in terms of education and research and to support this educational program and research. And the investment have not been done since 20 years. So we just began to understand the problem. So the time to promote cybersecurity culture at school will take a couple of years also. That's a problem.
Thank you. Time is running. I have still a lot of questions, but let's go to the audience to give you the opportunity to ask for questions. And the mic will, yes, may I just use your mic? Thank you. And so please feel free to ask your questions. Tell us your name and the organization for which you work. Any questions in the room? Yes.
Hi, thank you. Nina Larson with AFP, journalist. I was wondering if you could say something about the shift or what kind of shift you've seen in the types of attacks since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February, in terms of the quantity, but also the types of attacks, if that's possible. Thank you.
Yeah, please closer to the mic. But did you get the question? Yes. Who would like to answer? Stéphane?
So we started since the day of the invasion, the tracing of attacks in this context. We are now the tracing of more than 500 campaigns of attacks. You can cluster them in really 4 family: the attacks that are designed to destroy system, so like the wiper malware, and really to destroy the infrastructure. Attacks that are more designed to disrupt the normal functioning of infrastructure of systems, so denial of services, overloading the network with flows of information for this not to work properly. We saw that, for example, on a specific point of support in order to facilitate the exfiltration of refugees. You have another type of attack, which is weaponization of data that are stolen, and that's where suddenly you realize that the war did not start on the 24th of February, because this was positioned way before the physical invasion. So there were data thefts, gathering of information in order to have intelligence to be better placed to deploy attacks. And then the last one, which normally is not considered as cyber attacks, but I would advocate that it should be seen into this context, specifically in this conflict, is a disinformation campaign. Is how do you erode the trust of the public in specific capabilities while you are deploying cyber attacks. Something that is not so much known, and again, we have a public-facing platform with all the data that I was just mentioning that is just available for everyone to look into, is the fact that these attacks already impacted 33 countries. So we are already way beyond the border of Ukraine and Russia. Today, we have 33 countries which has been directly impacted by malicious activity generated in the context of this invasion.
Thank you. I think somebody else wanted to answer.
I can say something on the perspective of Switzerland, and other countries have that confirmed. We actually saw less attacks when it comes to ransomware and so on. And our theory, or let's call it a theory, is that on the one hand, we have seen that groups started to engage in the conflict, and they put their focus away from their criminal activity. And many groups consisted of Russian and Ukrainian, or pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian members, and they got in an infight and they split. And so they needed time for new groups to form. What we do expect, and what we warn companies and critical infrastructure about, is at one point in time, these criminal groups will need money, and they will come back, and they might even come back with a higher intensity. We don't think with more sophistication, but higher intensity to refill their finances.
Thank you. Is there any other question, sir?
Hi, Paul McIntosh, Asia Asset Management Magazine. We've heard a lot of comment on policy regarding cybersecurity that seems to encroach on areas such as policy on pollution, policy on international financial crime, policy on food standards, areas where you can see comparable regulation, action in established areas of these economy and society. Do we need a new paradigm for cybersecurity to define what exactly it is that we're doing in order to bring together all the relevant forces, or are our existing paradigms enough?
Who would like to answer? Is your question going to somebody part specific?
So maybe I just start. I think what Stéphane said is very important. In many areas, I do think they are enough because our life is becoming more digital and many of the activities shift in the digital space. And it doesn't matter if you steal money by taking it from someone directly or through the internet. It's the same law that applies, right? I do think we need to rethink how to efficiently enforce it, but also where we have gaps, because also with all these new business models, with all these new criminal activities and new means of projecting power and projecting force and dangers of collaterals in a wider area, I think we need to better understand it and really think how can we regulate that or how can we deal with that, because regulation might not always be the answer.
And if I may, I think cyberspace has no border, or at least different borders. So I think all those law and policy have the same challenge on how to apply on a digital ecosystem, digital meta, whatever verse you want to go. And probably also there is a pace aspect, agility and pace on adapting those policy and law to the reality and the pace of the internet.
Perhaps the question has to be asked on the state sovereignty level, because cybersecurity issue is at least a state sovereignty issue. So at whom the data belong? Who are the responsible for the data? When you deliver your data to companies, it's not yours anymore, your data sometimes. So that depends. So how we can deal with the problem of different value, and the value is on one side. Who belongs the value? Who is responsible for the value? And how we can decide if this thing is right or not right. So we have to, at the international level, to admit what we can do or what we cannot do in cyberspace. So perhaps we need an international instrument to decide the right thing at the international level, not at the European level only, because we have the Convention on Cybercrime, but it's a European convention, it's not an international instrument. So how we can go through the European level to a real international level with all the stakeholders that are involved in these decisions. So we have to decide what is just and lawful under any given circumstances. So we have to debate on that. No, we haven't debates, not yet.
Thank you. Any other question? Sir?
Thank you. My name is Richard Golding. I'm currently president of the British Swiss Chamber of Commerce here, and also a board member for a scientific research institute. So cybersecurity is extremely important to our board in such an organization. My question really relates to the session you were running, Pierre, about criminals and cyber criminals and the ability, even if you can discover who they are, to prosecute them on a national and an international level. A lot of that, it seems to me, purports to actually identifying who is behind any attack, whether it's one individual or it's a complex network. It's a vast subject. My question is, do you see, and particularly Mr. Schütz, do you see a government role, rather like we have in banking and financial services now, about the principle of know your customer, KYC as we call it? If I want to open a bank account or an investment account now, I have to go through an extremely rigorous process to prove I am who I say I am, as well as other things about what I want to do with my account. And the banks are obliged to do this, and they get in big trouble if they don't. I think most of us actually are quite comfortable with that. Do you think that the social media and the technology giants now who run these networks, where a lot of these criminals use it to infect us all, or to install spyware, or to commit fraud, or spread misinformation, and yet there was an article last week that said on Twitter now, over 50%, I don't know whether it's true or not, but over 50% of the accounts on Twitter are actually robots or artificial intelligence, that it's far too easy to set up false identities, and that is the heart of many of the problems that we face. Do you think we need Know Your Customer on Facebook and Twitter and so on? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, it's an important but not easy to answer question. It's one of these yes and no. So the question is, what do we mean by that? Yes, the government has a responsibility to react if there is suspicious activity or if there is a threat, right? And for that, we got, depending on the situation, we got police or intelligence that deal with these kind of things. Do I think every company should absolutely identify who they serve in the internet? I don't think so. I think there are legitimate reasons for anonymity. And I think anonymity is also very important. Now, we're living in Switzerland. We have a direct democracy. Nothing happens to you if you tell your opinion. There are other countries where this is not the case. And we don't know where Switzerland is in 30, 40, 50 years. We need to be very careful because democracies can tilt, right? I'm not saying we're moving in that direction, but it can happen. And we have the responsibility to build our state upon rules that is resilient towards these dangers. Now, that said, there's a second problem. Quite often, we actually have an idea, even down to the individual level, who the criminals are. So there's, or where they are. So one example is you maybe use WhatsApp, and some of you have received this, hey Jim, are you my tour guide, or similar messages. If you were polite, you answered, no, sorry, you got the wrong number, and then contact continues. The story behind that is that in Asia, in many Asian countries, because of COVID, hotels face the danger of not existing anymore. So they rent out to criminal gangs that do human trafficking, put mostly women in these hotel rooms, and from there they have to write these messages. Now the question is, can we do something about it on international law enforcement? And the unfortunate answer is very little, because the state accepted, because the tourism was a very important branch, and the hotels like it because they still earn money. I think we need to take the companies into the responsibility to have the capability to identify to a certain extent and block malicious behavior. I don't think they in any case need to know who it was, but they need to collaborate with law enforcement by identifying these individuals. And these are incredibly difficult topics, right? And we have them in Switzerland. We have many companies that promote privacy-enhancing technologies, and I think they're a strong asset here. But how we collaborate them if they're abused for criminal activity is working many times, but we still have some open questions.
Anybody else wants to add something? If not, we take one more question. Yes, sir.
Good evening, everybody. Ciro De Girolamo, Pomilio Bloom. So first of all, I would like to really thank you for the debate, because it's really extremely enriching and interesting to listen different opinions, some convergent, other divergent, on cyber issues. My question is, which concrete? It's more on the measures and on the concrete actions that can be put in place by the citizens on one side and institutions on the other side. And then I have a second question, more, let's say, an institutional level. In May 2018, the European General Data Protection Regulation came into force. So how the GDPR have an impact on cyber security issues, and what have you observed from your, in your role, in your positions, if you have seen an increase of awareness or some actions that should be emulated and follow. Thank you.
Stéphane?
So thanks for the question. What can be done practically? So one example, I'm pretty sure on the table there would be much more, but I was mentioning the program earlier, just the CyperPeace builders. It's something that we put in place that is really practical, where companies who has like a volunteering program already embedded, they decided that part of the time of the volunteers is going to be directly helpful to the most in need in the cyberspace, meaning today the humanitarian sector. So a program that is totally practical, where this workforce right away can help a NGO that is accessing, that is facilitating access to water, access to food, access to energy, providing shelter to refugees in Ukraine. they get cyber support directly, immediately. So that's something really practical, and there's a lot of avenues that we can think around this. The GDPR, I would turn around the question, maybe something that is not known is that there's always the good side of the compliance, and I mean, I'm really like a supporter of GDPR, so don't take my comment from that point of view, but there's stuff that also needs to be understood, that when there's a new law, criminals are creating a new crime. So you have now in the cyberspace GDPR-based attacks. So that cyber criminals, they are going to impact a company, knowing that as soon as they touch personal data, that company has an obligation of reporting. Otherwise, they're going to have a fine. And it gives to the criminal another leverage in order to have some blackmail to the company. So when there's regulation is good, but we need to think about how criminals are going to twist it for their criminal schemes.
Thank you very much. I guess we have to wrap it up here. Thank you very much for all your comments, your ideas, and this perspective. Very interesting. We see that it's a very, very complex world, and that different views also on the responsibility, which was the core topic of our debate, are spared between you. So that makes it interesting too. So there is not one unique answer to all this, and we'll have probably the opportunity to make another debate about that in a few weeks or months at least. Thank you very much again. And now we have a coffee break, and then in exactly half an hour we start with the keynote speech of Mr. Lieflanger from NATO. Thank you.